My dad was always interested in the family genealogy, and I guess, I kind of caught that from him because, he would often share things with me that he had discovered, and we would read things together and spent time together looking into the family background. And he did a lot of the groundwork, if you will, in that. And in fact, I have a big fat file on family history myself now, and a lot of it, and certainly the main resource documents came from my dad. He's the one that found the books and started out. And our family, it's got a long history in this country, and we don't know enough about it, and I guess I haven't been the greatest student in the world because there's a lot more to find out there. But I do know that, the first Thompsons that came to this country came from Scotland, and the first was one brother who came in 1751. And he was here about 2 years, and he talked his two brothers back in Scotland. He talked his two brothers, younger brothers, into coming over too, and they did. And so the other two brothers came over. So that was three of them here. One of the younger ones that came over was already married and had a family and brought the family with him. But so they came to the United States in 1751 and 1753, and they first settled somewhere, I believe, along the Delaware River down near Philadelphia. And I'm assuming now that they were farmers, because they had always had been back in Scotland, and they were for several generations more in North America. But they were Tories. They were for the English crown. And when the American Revolution was heating up, they were not in favor of the revolution. They were for colonization, for continuing, to be under British control. Being for the king or against the patriots, if you will, they didn't get along too well in the United States at that point, and had to go to Canada. Now, I don't know specifically how the Thompson brothers fared in that, or how big the families were at that time, or if they even went with their families, because some didn't back then. Those few who were outspokenly for the king had to leave, or under the threat of being killed. And a lot of them had to leave their property and everything here and get out of the country. And the Thompsons chose to go to Canada. So they were there for I assume from the 1770s until after 1900. And so there were several generations there. While there, they fought with the British armies against the American Revolution, and against the Americans again in the War of 1812. And became good Canadians and farmers. And they were given land in return for their good service to the king in Canada. And those became Thompson farms. And up until the point that's where my father was raised, was on a farm in Canada. And when he was about 10 or 11 years old, he was adopted by a relative and moved to New York State, back to the United States, and became a citizen. And so, if you will, my sister and I are the firstborn Americans again, because we're a new generation firstborn in this country. The reason my father was adopted and came to the United States was that his father died suddenly and strangely when my dad was about 8 years old, I think. It turned out he died he was poisoned. They believe he was poisoned by a hired hand on his farm. Never sure that some even felt that my grandmother, his wife, was responsible for it. And if you will, she had put the hired hand up to it and got him to poison my grandfather. And but the hired hand apparently committed suicide a couple days after that, so they never got to the bottom of it. Nobody was ever prosecuted. But here was my dad and his brother, a year younger than he, and just their mother on this farm. She couldn't handle that. And she didn't have the resource or the wherewithal to raise two boys on a farm, and she said so. So the two boys were put in an orphanage, and she sold the farm and disappeared. So when my grandfather's brother, or my dad's uncle, who lived in the United States, lived in New York State at that time, when he heard that the boys were in an orphanage, he and his wife said that they couldn't have that. They'd have to get them out of there, and they had no children. So they arranged, it took a while, I guess, but they arranged to have the boys adopted. They would adopt them and bring them to the United States, and they were made U.S. citizens at that time. And so my dad and his brother were brought here in 1910. And they finished their school and lived their lives here as the first generation Americans again from Canada. Yeah, near Buffalo, in between Buffalo and Niagara Falls, a city called North Tonawanda, but along the Niagara River. And that's where they all settled, and that's where I was born and grew up, and my sister and most of her family still live there. My father's name was Archibald Benjamin. That was a name he never liked. It wasn't modern enough, I guess. He was the oldest son, and his father was Benjamin Archibald, first middle name inverted. And Ben, it turned out, was the oldest son of Archibald Benjamin, who was my dad's grandfather, and so on back to the first Thompson we know of that came from Scotland, and his name was Archibald Benjamin. And I found out the town they came from. It's at a little town called Hawick in Scotland, near Edinburgh. And I found a group there on the internet. I found them that were offering that they would do a little genealogical research for anybody who might want them to do it. And so I sent off an email to this group, and I said that had forefathers who came from Hawick, the year 1751, and this is the name, and that's all I know. Do you have any information, or can you tell me what else might be needed or where else I might go? So a little while, I got a nice email back from some fella. Says, well, he said, we don't have enough to go on. We need birth dates or churches or marriage dates or christening dates or whatever that we can go into, somehow pinpoint it in church records, which would be the way to do it back then. And we'll be glad to do that if you can give us more information. And he signed his name, and it was Archibald Benjamin Thompson. And it was spelled the way we used to spell our name, without the P, Thomson, the Scottish way. So it's a small world. We haven't found any more out about that, but I'd like to continue looking. We'll see. The first Thompsons that came over, it spelled their name as was the Scottish custom was Thomson, Thomson. It was more common that the English spelled the name Thompson. And our family went through, moving here and living sometime, some decades here in the United States, and then moving to Canada and living there for some time. But as a result of some of the Thompson males had served in with the British armies, some in the Canadian militia mainly, but certainly under the control of the British officers. And when the War of 1812, for example, when that was over, the Thompson boys that had fought in that war, they had nothing. They had nothing. They had no job, no home to go to, no land or anything. They had been soldiers for years, and so they petitioned a British officer who was stationed at Fort George, and in Canada, and they said, can you help us? Well, he went to the Crown and asked that land be given to these men in return for their service, and so a block of land was allotted by the King of England in Canada there to give to these veterans who had served well, and two or three of them I believe were Thompsons, and they were given farms in the Niagara region in Ontario, but when those land grants came through, they were spelled in the English version Thompson, and so the family changed its name rather than risk losing the land and trying to get the land grants changed. So it became Thompson with a P from then on, and still is. And those lands were the land that is now the Niagara Parks region, around the Niagara Falls area. I know the Royal Botanical Garden is there for Canadian Botanical College is right there, and so they have a grand display of everything going on there, and they have a big floral calendar that visitors from all over the world see every year. That was on a Thompson farm. The point where the Whirlpool cable car is across a portion of the river that covers the Whirlpool there. One of the points it touches and hooks onto is called Thompson Point, and that's where the Thompson farm was, and it was visible from the farmhouse. I have documentation of all that. So we never saw any of the money from it, but somehow it went from being Thompson Farms to Canadian Parkland, and it's a beautiful place today.